So let's talk about transhumanism, like what he really believes about that, trying to curtail death altogether, okay? Not just alleviate suffering, not just heal sickness, which I do think is an extension of the Christian purpose, by the way, but to try to eliminate death altogether by curtailing this natural process of human expiration that we have inherited because of our sin in Adam. Here's thought two.
The trans people in a sexual context, or I don't know, a transvestite is someone who changes their clothes and cross dresses. And a transsexual is someone where you change your, I don't know, penis into a vagina. And we can then debate how well those surgeries work. But we want more transformation than that. The critique is not that it's weird and unnatural. It's so pathetically little. And okay, we want more than cross-dressing or changing your sex organs. We want you to be able to change your heart and change your mind and change your whole body.
No, we don't. We do not want that. It's too far. Science, Silicon Valley, I feel like in so many ways is the Tower of Babel. It is in so many different ways. In so many different ways, it is human beings trying to build their way to God and trying to be God. And we know that God didn't like that because he scattered them and he confused all of their languages. And actually, I think that there is a portion of like the H-1B debate in Silicon Valley that is relevant to that story. But also here, it is a form of self-idolatry. And it is not trusting in and hoping in the glory that we are promised in Christ, but we are trying to attain that here. It's very much like the mentality that I see from progressives who confuse like what the kingdom of heaven actually is. They believe that it is ending all of their version of oppression or their idea of inequality here on earth. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to alleviate the suffering from true oppression, because we should, but their belief is that there is not a future heaven that we are going toward, but that we can actually politically create some kind of utopia here on earth where no person ever has more than another person and everyone is liberated and all systems and institutions and, all order and hierarchy is eliminated. That is the progressive idea of bringing the kingdom of heaven here on earth through social justice and political means. And this is almost like a progressive technological version of that we can bring the kingdom of heaven here on earth through technology, which brings us into what he actually thinks. If that is a correct assessment, that's just my opinion, of what he believes, then that informs what he means when he says the Antichrist, when he is conducting these seminars on what the Antichrist is. According to the New York Times, because he describes this in this interview with Ross Douthat, and I read the whole transcript. He is brilliant. He is a very, very smart person. And so clearly he's thought a lot about this, but I do find it from a Christian perspective to be very confusing considering what we know biblically about the actual Antichrist. So Thiel describes the Antichrist as a potential systemic threat rather than a literal individual, suggesting it could manifest as a one-world totalitarian state that promises peace and safety, but suppresses freedom. So he actually cites the Bible in supporting this idea. He connects it to 1 Thessalonians 5:3. He argues that the Antichrist appeal lies in exploiting fears of catastrophic technologies to justify centralized control. The way the Antichrist would take over the world is you talk about Armageddon nonstop. You talk about existential risk nonstop, and this is what you need to regulate. So you could see, if that is the case, how that would have manifested itself many times over the years. No, it's, nuclear weapons are going to be like Armageddon. You need to make sure that I have all of the power. No, this over here is going to be the Armageddon. Climate change is going to be the Armageddon. You need to make sure that I have all of the power to stop that. But he is arguing that the Antichrist will be someone who actually pushes for technological stagnation. I think he believes that a lot of people wrongly believe that the Antichrist will be someone who uses AI and uses technology to gain all of this power, this Antichrist power, to set himself against governments, to set himself against God himself. He's arguing that it will actually be the opposite. Now, what is not completely clear to me is whether or not Peter Thiel believes in an actual man of lawlessness that the Bible describes, which we'll get into in a second, or if he believes the Antichrist is kind of a metaphor for technological stagnation. And maybe he describes that clearly somewhere. It is not completely clear to me. So in his interview, he expresses concern that modern technology, particularly artificial intelligence and global data systems, could provide the infrastructure for what the Bible calls the Antichrist. But again, not how we would think of it, but someone who sets himself against those things. Now, it is worth noting that as we're trying to describe his beliefs, that his company, Palantir, right? There's so many different ways that it looks like you could pronounce that, develops those kinds of technologies, large-scale software systems used by government agencies and other entities to assist in their operations. And so, Ross, the interviewer here, is like, well, aren't you just kind of trying to make it seem like anyone who opposes what you're trying to do is part of the Antichrist? Here's thought 3.
You're an investor in AI. You're deeply invested in Palantir, in military technology, in technologies of surveillance, in technologies of warfare, and so on, right? And it just seems to me that when you tell me a story about the Antichrist coming to power and using the fear of technological change to sort of impose order on the world, I feel like that Antichrist would maybe be using the tools that you were building, right?
There are all these different scenarios. I obviously don't think that that's what I'm doing.
Okay, so I thought that was a fair question by Ross, and obviously Peter Thiel doesn't see it that way, but I think that that's fair to ask. Thiel says that the Antichrist would gain power by exploiting the constant fear of apocalyptic scenarios that could be brought to fruition by things like AI. He says the way the Antichrist would take over the world is you talk about Armageddon nonstop, you talk about existential risk nonstop, and this is what you need to regulate. So, I mean, it is interesting and maybe questionable that someone who makes a lot of money through technology would say that stopping technological innovation is actually going to, usher in the Antichrist or be a part of the Antichrist plan to take over the world. Again, whether he thinks that literally, theologically, or whether he just thinks that's a metaphor for like environmentalism taking over because he really doesn't like Greta Thunberg is kind of unclear.